good morning, or afternoon, or whenever you're listening. Welcome to ICU Doc Talk. Thanks for joining me. I am a anesthesiologist and double-boarded in critical care anesthesiologist, critical care physician, and this is a podcast where I talk about medicine. Sometimes I talk about politics, and I always talk about books and history, and here we are again. Today I'm only talking about politics. I know I usually don't do that. But that's what's going to be today. If it's too much, if you've had enough, don't listen. But I'm going to be discussing some things, probably nothing new or revelatory, but just my thoughts about what's going on in the United States. And that's it. That's it today. All right. And then we'll get some book reviews and some emails at the end of the show here. So join me, or don't. I'll see you next time. That's fine. Here we go. So you know how you have like a thought or a feeling about something, like something's going on, and you try to form words to that feeling or that thought. And sometimes you capture it really well with your words, and sometimes you don't. I think I finally captured what I've been feeling lately with just a simple sentence. And here's the sentence. It's to disbelieve is to be disarmed. Okay, to disbelieve is to be disarmed. And what I see so much lately it's February of 2025, right? We're well into Trump's second term. And what I see a lot is people being, I cannot believe we're back here again. It's unbelievable that he is here. I cannot believe he did this. Well, to disbelieve is to be disarmed. So it's time to start believing, and it's time to start accepting what is happening and where we're at. Accepting is not to consent. Okay, but acceptance is very, very important, and believing and understanding what is happening is extremely important for everybody right now. Cannot stand in disbelief. Got to be done with disbelieving. To disbelieve is to be disarmed. We must accept and understand what is happening right now in the United States. Okay, and what is happening? Well, it's pretty obvious, right? And let me just back it up. Okay, so I know I've talked about it before, but let's define. I'll do this quick. Let's define what fascism is, and let's talk about the unique features of American neo-fascism or Trump neo-fascism. Okay, so one of the main reason that a lot of people are getting bogged down and confused about what's going on is they don't understand what fascism is. And it's important to understand what fascism is. And I want to make it very clear. It is not hyperbole and it is not exaggeration to say that Trumpism is fascism. It's not. It's just not hyperbole, according to the definitions that I'm going to give now. Okay? So fascism, the first thing to understand about it, it is an ideology. It's not a socio-political structure. All right? That is extremely important. This is where a lot of people on the right get lost. Right away they get lost because fascism is an ideology. It's conservative ideology. It's extreme conservative ideology. Now, where the people are getting lost is they're conflating fascism and authoritarianism. Those are two different things. Authoritarianism is a government structure. Fascism is not a government structure. Now, they can become. Fascism is the ideology that has led to authoritarianism or totalitarianism or autocratic rule. Those are all kind of the synonymous things at the moment. Okay? It's a key point. So, like, fascism is defined by, mostly for me, three individuals. There's more, though, right? But Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco. Okay? So the politics, these fascist movements of the 1930s and 1920s, 30s, and 40s, in the 20th century is how I'm defining fascism. I'm going to get to it. But these were fascist leaders. Now, you can use fascist ideology and still not have an authoritarian government structure. All right? But where people get confused is they think, so to call Trump a fascist, people are like, well, he wasn't, in his first term, we weren't under authoritarian rule, so he can't be a fascist. Well, that's where people are making their first mistake. Is you can be a fascist politician working within the bounds of a more democratic or constitutional republic structure. Okay, and that's what we have right now. So that's a very, very key point. Okay, fascism is not necessarily totalitarianism or authoritarianism. Now, Nazi Germany became authoritarian. So did Mussolini's government structure, and same with Franco. Okay. Now, there's other fascist politicians that I'm not going to get too much into, but of the 20th century, right? But those are the prototypical world leaders of the 20th century that we refer to when we talk about fascism. So what is fascism? Let's just define it really quick. So it is always a conservative ideology, right? Where communism is a liberal, or not liberal, is a leftist ideology. Okay. Now, when I say I'm going to be talking about communism as well. When I say communism, I'm talking about Stalinism or Leninism and the state structure of communism of the Soviets. Okay, I'm not talking about the economic theory of communism. Okay, I'm talking about the actual implementation, the state implementation or the parties of communism. Okay, but so fascism is always conservative and it's ultra nationalist. All right, it's often paired with ethnic purity. Right, that defined Nazi Germany. The Nazi Party was ethnic purity. It is highly misogynistic. Okay, it always wants that family structure because that's couched with that ethnic purity, that you have to preserve the family structure with patriarchy and misogyny, right? With traditional family roles of men and women in the home, et cetera, et cetera. That is a key feature of fascist movements, is misogyny. And with that misogyny comes normalizing violence towards women or sexual assault and things like that. Okay. So you have ultranationalism, right? Putting the state or the nation or the ethnic population above anything else. That is key. It always has paramilitary support. Okay. Paramilitary is aside. Para means aside to the side of the military. So it has militias that are extra legal paramilitary. Okay, this happened in all fascist movements, and it happens with Trump. Obviously, we've seen that. He courts paramilitary groups, and he's also pardoned paramilitary groups. Literally the criminals that help to try to, deny the lawful succession of power in 2020. Okay. So he's now freed them. So he has a paramilitary group. That is a key feature of fascism, is to have a paramilitary group that can work extra legally on your behalf, at your behest, without actually being officially in control. So that is a key feature, right? Hitler had the brown shirts. Stormtroopers. It's it's a key feature. Now that could be a feature of communism as well, and it is. Now, one of the main things that defines fascism is that it is anti-communist. Okay, this is another big problem. Now, let's talk about socialism in a minute, because this is where lots of people get confused as well with what fascism is. But one of the key features of fascism is to be anti-left. That is a key feature. In fact, I don't think something can be called fascist unless it is anti-left. And what I mean by that is it uses anti-communist, anti-left panic as a way of consolidating its support, right? So back in Germany during the Weimar Republic, which was more of a social, it was a republic, it was more, the social democrats were highly in control, right? And this is during the Red Scare, and this is when you had the Russian Revolution, and you had communist panic flooding Western society, right? In England and Germany and the United States, right? These are Western countries were all similar in this regard. But to have fear that you're going to have communists overrun your government and your people, the Red Scare, that is as a characteristic of fascism, 100%. And in Germany, they had the Nazi Party used something called cultural Bolshevism, right? So, but the Bolsheviks were the revolution party that came in with that Lenin led and Stalin, and that's what brought the Soviets into control in Russia. Okay. So having panic about that, cultural Bolshevism being like, the Nazis would blame anything that they didn't like. They would say, oh, it's cultural Bolshevism. Oh, this is degenerate art. We're going to purge our society of cultural Bolshevism. Oh, the Bolsheviks might not be in charge, but we have cultural Bolshevism that is infiltrating our society, and we need to purge it from our society, right? So that is anti-woke panic. It's the same thing. Anti-woke panic is rebranded cultural Bolshevism, or blaming DEI hires, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same fascist phenomenon. It's just contorted and rebranded today. Okay. Now, the Trumpist neo-fascism today is, which I'm going to get to more, of course. One of its vehicles of power is to use free speech as a rhetorical trap to mainstream hate speech. Okay, so free speech absolutism, right? This is another feature of fascism. It really is free speech absolutism, being like any speech should go, or is okay. Anybody can sit at the table and talk, right? That is a trap to make hate speech, bigotry, racism, the ethnic superiority of white supremacy to go mainstream. And it has absolutely happened in the United States. We're here. It's already happened. Okay. I mean, you literally have Elon Musk doing a Hail Hitler salute during the inauguration. He did it. You've seen it. You know he did it. Doesn't matter what he says. Doesn't matter what anybody else says. He did it. This Thanksgiving, you're going to have your crazy uncle at Thanksgiving dinner who says crazy right-wing stuff. This Thanksgiving, he's probably going to be saying something like, well, some of the Nazis had some pretty good ideas. Not all Nazis were that bad. Right? That is right around the corner. It's already happening. And this is the normalization of hate speech into under the protection of free speech that mainstreams bigoted, racist, fascist ideas. And we're here. It has arrived. Now, let me also talk about where people are getting confused about what fascism is. So lots of people conflate fascism with socialism. All right, so you see people on the right, the radicalization of the right, which is what we have, is you have them saying, well, fascism is, the Hitlers were fascists because they were socialists, right? And left-wing is fascist, and socialism is fascism, and it's all bad. It's all authoritarianism, right? They lump it all together. And there's a lot of reasons that people are doing this. Now, they're either purposely doing it, they don't understand, or they do understand, and they're trying to just broadcast it that way. But so the Nazi Party, they were also socialists. I mean, the party was called National Socialists. Now, people on the left, they like to make excuses for the Nazi Party. Not excuses, I should rephrase that, but they try to be like, oh, well, they weren't really socialists. But they were. And so that has to do with authoritarianism. So once authoritarian rule comes in place, they then start using state power and single party rule to try to provide everything to the state. And that looks like communism or socialism, right? When the state starts doing everything, like having a centrally controlled economy and price controls and all those things. And the Nazi Party did that, right? Once the Nazi Party got total control legally using their constitution, once Hitler finally got control, they did that. They had tons of social programs to benefit the German Aryan race only, right? So it was ethnically selective. So they did that, but that's why a lot of people are confused, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, I'm I'm against fascism because." So what they do is then they say anything that the state provides is authoritarianism, which is obviously false, because by that definition, so if any social program is authoritarianism, then literally every Western democratic society is authoritarianism, because there's a social state in literally every modern society, right? So that is not true. That cannot be true. Now, there's something called horseshoe theory, which you maybe are familiar with. And horseshoe theory is that any ideology, so you have authoritarianism, right? Any ideology can lead to authoritarianism, which we see in the 20th century. If you look at the history of authoritarianism, regardless of ideology, you can see that either ideology, left-wing and right-wing, can both lead to authoritarianism. And that is also where people are getting confused. And they think they are defending freedom, et cetera, when they're actually supporting fascism and that which can lead to authoritarianism. This is what you see all the time. So that's horseshoe theory, right? Rather than authoritarianism being a linear line, like, oh, if you get too far to the left, you get authoritarianism, or if you get too far to the right, you get authoritarianism. It's a horseshoe shape. Like, if you go too far to the left, or if you go too far to the right, they bend in a horseshoe, and you arrive at authoritarianism. Now, that's debatable, right? Lots of people on the left say, no, it's fishhook theory, but I'll leave that. You can go look that up if you want to look up fishhook theory. Those are what leftists like to say. Leftists hate horseshoe theory, right? Extreme leftists. They're like, no, but horseshoe theory is obviously, as a simplified model, yes, it's definitely true, right? Because you have left-wing ideology that clearly led to authoritarian rule in the 20th century in Russia and China and many other places. So, but because of this phenomenon of horseshoe theory, people on the right are like, oh, I'm defending freedom because anything that has to do with the state and bureaucracy or social programs or giving kids free lunches leads to authoritarianism, right? And this is the tradition that was set up. Basically, this was set up by lots of conservative writers in the 20th century, leading all the way up to today, from Friedrich Hayek to Milton Friedman to Sowell. Lots of different writers have influenced. You have the John Birch Society and the Heritage Foundation, these think tanks that were fringe in the 1960s and 70s. And now they've all come home to roost. We are now living their dream. It is absolutely happening right now. And we are now living in a neo-fascist state. Trumpism is neo-fascism by how I have defined it just now. And what you see time and time and again with people, you have the normalization of these fascist ideas. So easily half Americans support fascism now. Right? Easily. Remember, to disbelieve is to be disarmed. Believe it. It's happened. Easily half Americans either knowingly support it. So you saw, people, liberals on, after Trump was elected being like, hey, we warned you about Project 2025. We warned you. No. They wanted it. People on the right that read 2020, that actually, they wanted it. Okay? People voted for Trump because they want him. Okay? I highly recommend you do not reach for conspiracy theories that Elon Musk and Trump bought the election, et cetera, okay? Don't reach for those things. What's the most likely explanation? That people want Trump. They want fascism. Whether they full-throated support it, or they're just ignorant of what even is happening. And they fell into the rhetorical traps and all that thing, and they fell for immigrant scapegoating. I forgot to mention immigrant scapegoating is obviously one of the number one features of fascism, okay, and authoritarianism. But they wanted it, okay. People that read, they want it. They want Project 2025. How many Americans? I don't know, but it's a lot, okay. Is it a majority? Probably not, but it might be half, okay. So perhaps half of Americans full-throated support fascism, okay. To disbelieve that is to be disarmed. We must accept this, and we must accept that Donald Trump appropriately represents the United States. He aptly represents what America is. And I want to, on that note, let me transition to something else, okay? There's a big phenomenon going on right now. The people on the right, they're blaming the tyranny of the U.S. government solely on the Democratic Party. And this is because people do not understand what the United States is, and that it has been an imperialist empire for most of its existence. I had an unpleasant discussion with somebody on Facebook that I knew 20 years ago, which I'm sure you've had the same experience. It's someone that you vaguely know, you kind of like, oh yeah, I remember them from college or whatever. And, you have a terrible discussion that leaves you feeling awful afterwards. So I had one of these recently, of course. It's always, it's like a dog returning to their vomit, right? When you have these arguments on the internet with people, you're never going to convince anybody, and you're going to walk away feeling worse. I do anyway. So you have there's the nomination of RFK Jr. to HHS. You obviously know how I'm going to feel about RFK Jr., right? He's a pseudoscience hack. He's a moron. He's an idiot, right? He's a dumb man. Donald Trump is a dumb man as well. They're very stupid people. Now people behind what they're doing are shrewd and clever. These are dumb people in charge. And RFK Jr. is very stupid. Let me get back to this conversation I was having with somebody that I remotely knew from 2 decades prior. So this person supported RFK Jr. and their reasoning was because the government lied about the Tuskegee trials, the syphilis study that was done against black men in the United States. So that was one of the reasons, and that the government lies about all these things, etc. And RFK Jr. is calling that out. That was their reasoning. Okay, so finding out that the government, a huge part of a lot of the sympathy people have towards Trump and his cadre is lots of people have discovered only recently that the U.S. government is quite corrupt and tyrannical. And then they take all that and they blame it solely on one party, the Democratic Party, which of course, I'm not a fan of the Democratic Party. Who would be? And they champion, they think Trump is the champion that's going to correct all these things, right? So they contort, so they don't understand that the U.S. government has done many awful things, regardless that has also been supported by the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. It doesn't matter really what party has been in charge. The U.S. government does bad things, and it lies to everybody, and it has for a long time. And it's been at war for 90% of its existence. So they're blaming the tyranny of the U.S. government on the Democratic Party as an excuse for Trump to do the things that he's doing. Okay? This is extremely naive and childlike understanding of what the U.S. is. That is a huge phenomenon that I see. And then you see, there's another term that I've come up with that has defined what phenomenon I'm seeing. It's malicious respectability. So when you're arguing with people, they'll use malicious respectability. They're being respectable, right? They're being like, hey, let's not call him a fascist. Let's not call them dumb idiots. I'm just trying to have a conversation here. I'm just trying to seek truth, blah, blah, blah. It's malicious respectability. So you can be respectable, but if you're spewing absolute ethnic superiority and nonsense and things like that, you don't have moral authority. It doesn't matter if you're using respectable language. You don't have moral authority. You don't have any credibility. The things you're saying have a foundation of hate and pseudoscience and just nonsense. Okay, I know you've had these same experiences as I've having. Okay, I've had the same frustration that you have had. It's maddening. It's absolutely maddening. And there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, there is something you can do about it. You don't engage in these conversations, which I usually do not. But you always come back to it. There's just something about it that just brings you back. And it's always worse, right? Because the people that are manipulated by Trump neo-fascism cannot be reasoned with. We are beyond that now. They cannot be reasoned with for many reasons, which I've talked about before. And what you see a lot with the support of Trumpism is he does something, and then there's radio silence on the right, and then a 24 or 48-hour news cycle, and then they come around to what's going on. You're going to see it over and over again as things get more extreme. Okay? It's going to get more and more extreme. You see silence as they're like, oh, what's going on? And then they come around and they start supporting you again, right? They've been doing this for 8 years now. They'll always come around to him. They're never going to come back to reasoning. Accept it. To disbelieve is to be disarmed. We must accept what is happening. And what's going on right now with the Trump administration is a blitzkrieg of movement, right? That's where his power is at right now, is to move quickly. And what you're seeing playing out is something something popularized by Timothy Snyder, who's a great writer about fascism and stuff like this. It's the politics of inevitability, the belief that something like democracy or capitalism is inevitable if we give it enough time, right? So people are like, oh, give Trump enough time. We'll have an economy of prosperity. Just give it enough time. And then the other concept is the politics of eternity, that the current state or power or villainy that is going on is one eternal round. It will never change, right? Inevitability blinds us to the reality of what's going on. And the politics of eternity binds us with the belief that nothing could ever possibly change, so there's no reason to try. So that politics of eternity, probably, if you're part of my audience, is probably really bringing you down right now. That things can never change, that they'll always be this way. Well, that's not true. Things do change. But they will never go back to what they were, and things are definitely going to get worse before they're going to get better. That's a certainty. Another quote that's been going through my mind lately is from Ursula K. Le Guin, who's one of my favorite sci-fi and fantasy writers. And in a book I read recently called Tehanu, which is from her Earthsea cycle, phenomenal. Okay, phenomenal. Is that which cannot be healed must be transcended. Let me say it again. That which cannot be healed must be transcended. That's where we're at right now. We cannot be healed. What's going on cannot be healed. It must be transcended into something else. It will be. I don't know what that is. It's certainly going to get worse before it gets better. Here's my fears. Okay. Now, I'm not a political pundit. I don't have you can't predict anything. There's no prediction. But I will talk about my fears. Constitutional crisis, et cetera, right? That's old hat. We all know that. I mean, it's already happening. Constitutional crisis has been happening. It's been a slow burn for the last couple of years. Constitutional crises, right? That's like par for the course now with American politics. But currently, right, in February 2025, my current fears are, have deepened. And what I'm afraid of is that, so the high courts, the judiciary is what saved us from Trump in 2020. And they will try to do the same now. And they will try to stay or put holds on what Trump is doing, executive orders, etc. And what will happen is Trump won't care, because he doesn't, because he's a fascist. And he's a rising dictator, right? He's not a dictator yet, but he's trying. He's a rising dictator using fascist ideology to get in power. He will ignore the courts, okay? He will. It doesn't matter how they rule. Or the judiciary will be intimidated, coerced. Maybe they'll be murdered, right? Maybe one judge. All it takes is one judge to be murdered. To get judges to fall in line. But the judiciary being controlled or coerced or ignored, that's a problem. And then you have one arm of law enforcement that's trying to enforce the judiciary's rulings, and then you have another arm that Trump controls, like the DOJ and the FBI, who then ignores them. And then these are acting in legal spheres, and then you have Trump controlling literally a paramilitary group that he can command at any time to defend him. And then you have a real problem, right? With these forces that then clash. That's a real problem. My other fears, to me, this is the signal that we are entering a new echelon. My greatest fear is single party rule. That is always the fear. That's the greatest fear, right? If you look at 20th century politics, it's always single party rule where all the badness happens. Doesn't matter the ideology. It's always single party rule, right? Whether it was Stalin or Mao or Hitler, Mussolini, Pinochet, Putin, single party rule. Okay. We're in a bad spot when I keep saying, like, well, at least we still have two political parties. We do. At least we still have two political parties. A new signal to me that things have gotten worse behind the scenes is when you have the Democrats that start voting with the GOP. Now we're in trouble. We're already in trouble. But now we're in a new echelon of trouble, because that means Trump and his cadre have gotten leverage over the opposition party somehow, whether through moneyed interests or coercion, however it is, violence, I don't know, whatever it is. Then we have issues. Then we have real big issues, right? And if they somehow are able to get rid of the filibuster, this country is fundamentally changed forever, and will probably enter autocracy. So those are my fears. Okay, but at least there are still two political parties. At least there's still two political parties. Another thing to look for soon, that it will happen, is there's either a false flag operation, right? That's where something, an event, some sort of attack or something is fabricated. and then it's used as a political weapon by Trump. That could happen, right? He could have anyone of a member of his paramilitary groups that he controls fabricate a crisis, or he can just wait for a crisis, right? Crises happen in the United States every day, and then they will be used as political tool to then crack down on wokeism or DEI or whatever his scapegoat is, to then gain more control and leverage and try to institute martial law, right? That's going to happen. That is definitely going to happen, I think. Yeah. So what do we do? What do we do? Well, I do think the time for discourse is over. Unfortunately, usually discourse is always the solution, but you cannot have discourse with ignorant, crazy people who do not understand what they're doing. You just can't. You can't have discourse with people like that. So what do? You got to protect yourself. You got to protect yourself. Whatever that means. Mentally, protect your mental health. Get off social media if it's killing you. If it's making you focus so much, you got to protect your mind, because you can't control what's going on. I can't control it, and you can't control it. You can't control people's ludicrous opinions and their misconceptions, right? And their ignorance and their bigotry. You can't control it. You can't control what they say. You just can't. So you gotta protect your mind. Your life is more than the political dumpster fire that's happening right now. Your life is more than that, right? You have beautiful things in your life. Move the gaze of your focus to, or broaden it, I should say. Don't make it narrow. Broaden it. Now, to disbelieve is to be disarmed. So you have to understand what's going on, but broaden the gaze of your focus to the beautiful things in your life, because they're there. And they're more important to your sphere, right? Protect your mental health. And protect your family and your loved ones the way you see fit. Focus on yourself is my recommendation. There's nothing you can do. This has to burn itself out. There is nothing, like, the things to prevent this, what's going on, that ship has already sailed. That was years ago. We cannot reverse course. It's impossible. The United States political landscape is fundamentally changed forever, and it's now going down this path. And there is nothing you can do about it. Accept it. You must accept it. Okay? To disbelieve is to be disarmed. That which cannot be healed must be transcended. I hope that helps you. Now, I'm going to talk about a book I read recently. It's called The Third Reich at War. It's by Richard J. Evans. Now, this is the third part in a series by Richard J. Evans that I've talked about his other two books, I'm sure, on this show. And the series is called The History of the Third Reich, and this is called The Third Reich at War. And it's extremely good. If you don't know anything about Nazi Germany, you need to read these books. I've become pretty obsessed about reading about Nazi Germany, and I think you know how lots of people love true crime dramas? To me, this is my true crime drama. When I read about Nazi Germany, it helps me think like, oh, well, at least it's not this bad. It honestly is therapeutic for me. It's weird. But so this book, The Third Reich at War, as I said, it's the final installment in the phenomenal series called The History of the Third Reich. And I recommend you read all three books. It's a phenomenal overview of one of the worst events that has ever happened to humanity, which is Nazi Germany. And that's not hyperbole to say. The Third Reich is almost indisputably the worst thing that has happened to humankind in history, and in terms of like the breadth and the depth and the depravity and the loss of human life. Have there been tyrannical regimes before and after the Third Reich? Yes. Did they have the impact on as many nations and peoples and ethnicities and lives? I really don't think so. So this book focuses on Nazi Germany from 1939 to 1945. I just want to go over the timeline of these years first. Okay. So Hitler annexed Austria and Hungary in like 1939 without resistance and under the pretense of protecting the ethnic purity of his people. Right? That's fascist ideology. It was when he invaded Poland with his famous blitzkrieg tactic that they were really moving then. And that forced the hand of France and England to declare war. The Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact was broken by Hitler, which then got Stalin all riled up, who also annexed parts of Poland and invaded Finland. According to Hitler, the Poles were to be eradicated. Over 500 Polish towns were burnt to the ground as a merciless genocide then ensued. Ghettos were created in Warsaw where disease and poverty and death were widespread. The Eastern Soviet side was no better, as mass extermination of Poles and Jewish people was swiftly underway as there as well. The Soviets invaded Finland, although the Finns were able to maintain apparently some sort of independent state while the Russians occupied and used the country for military purposes against Germany. A Norwegian fascist politician named Vidkun Quisling then convinced Hitler that the Allies were going to invade Norway, which gave Hitler the impetus to go ahead and invade Norway, which he did, much to British discontent. Germany then invaded Belgium, placed Leopold under house arrest, and then he just waltzed into France and into Paris. Now at that point, you'd think completely upending and conquering almost all of Eastern Europe and France might have made Hitler stop and revel in his accomplishments and call it a day for like a decade. And if he had stopped there and focused on defense and domestic stability, it's very possible he could have conquered England and its satellites and its empire, years later. But he didn't do that because he was an insane, evil person, and he went ahead and tried to conquer everything. His first real, military blunder was air flights, or attacks early on with England, which did not initially go well. Hitler wasn't able to gain traction in the skies and halted a planned land and sea operation on England. Hitler tried to get Franco's support in Spain, but he didn't offer anything for support, and Franco shrewdly declined, fearing that the U.S. would get involved and that Churchill would just retreat to Canada to put up resistance if Hitler invaded England. Hitler and Mussolini were already bosom buddies, and so they joined their aspirations together. Fortunately for everyone else, Mussolini was a total idiot. Germany and Italian forces joined together to annex French and British colonies in North Africa, which did not go well. Against Hitler's advice, Mussolini invaded Greece, which was a military disaster. Italy lost 40,000 men. Mussolini was humiliated. The British knew all of Mussolini's plans and even got back control over Ethiopia and reinstated as sovereign there, while also getting control over all of the African colonies. So major losses in North Africa for Germany and Italy. Later on, Mussolini was politically ousted by his own party. He was imprisoned. Hitler then sent a secret mission that broke Mussolini out of prison, and then Hitler installed Mussolini back into a puppet regime in northern Italy, which Hitler controlled. Later, once things fell apart for Hitler, Mussolini was hung by Italians and his body was desecrated. That's how he ended. But back to the other insanity. Yugoslavia was going to cooperate with Hitler, but then some Siberian royalty got crowned, was defiant, so Hitler invaded there and crushed Yugoslavia and Greece. But there was tons of hardened resistance. A fascist Croat leader was installed who backed Hitler and did plenty of Serbian ethnic cleansing, probably history that carried through to the 1990s conflict. You had a fascist leader in Romania that was backing Hitler as well. And then Hitler, like the crazed lunatic he was, invaded Russia. Operation Barbarossa was the largest invasion in the world, in world history, and completely destroyed the current Red Army for just a moment. Stalin was totally flat-footed, and it looked like Hitler would also succeed in conquering Russia. He thought it would be a permanent victory, but the Red Army wouldn't die. The Eastern Theater between Germany and Russia became the main part of the war. 80% of all combat was there. Think about that again. 80%. Most of World War II was between Hitler and Stalin. 30 million people died in the Eastern Theater alone. 9 million were children. And then that's where things got bad for Hitler. His attempts to invade Stalingrad was an utter disaster. Soviet and British production ramped up from the 1940s onward, and Germany was always behind. Lots of Nazi leadership knew years in advance that they would lose, hence the multiple assassination attempts on his life, trying to wrestle power away from the lunatic. But of course, Hitler kept living, most of the times within the delusions of his mind. Britain outproduced air warfare and obliterated many German cities. Like Frankfurt and Dresden, around 500,000 German civilians were killed from the air raids. German morale and Hitler popularity plummeted in 1944 and 1945. The Allies invaded Italy. With Mussolini gone, the Italians just became another indolent and racially impure people to Hitler, who also sought to eradicate them. There was also biological warfare with malaria at that time in Italy. Hitler then made all civilian men aged 16 to 60 go march and die in a war that was already over. And then he just killed himself, right? Leaving his destruction for the rest of the world to deal with, including up until right now. So this book spends a great deal of time with not only the ghettoization, but extermination of Jews, Poles, the mentally ill, physically disabled, homosexuals, gypsies, and basically anyone that wasn't of the Aryan race. The Third Reich lived and died on the blade of ethnic purity. It was its main tenet. And it was quite secular, right? Nazism was quite secular. That's what a lot of people on the left, I think, forget. And that is what a Nazi is, and the underpinning of both Hitler's rise and fall from power. It's Aryan race superiority over the Jews. That is the underpinning of Nazism. That sums it up fairly completely. But you don't have to be a Nazi to be a fascist or to be a neo-Nazi. Neo-Nazis just take the Aryan race superiority thing and they apply it to themselves and their respective ultra-nationalism. So neo-fascism, as I've already talked about, is happening right now. Is the Third Reich on the rise? No, not precisely. But it is within that imprecision where current neo-fascism lives, under the ambiguous banner of free speech. These people use free speech as a rhetorical trap to justify their hate speech, spreading bigotry and racial superiority to the mainstream. This has already occurred in the United States. If you don't see it, then you don't know what's going on, or you fully support it. How does all of this end? Poorly. Okay? Very poorly. It's just something you need to accept. Alright, that's all I have to say about this for today. I don't know if what I've said has been helpful. It's not hopeful. I know that, but it's realistic. Alright? If you take one thing from this, just that line I've repeated a million times. To disbelieve is to be disarmed. We must believe with eyes wide open what is going on. All right, let's get to an email. This is from Michael. Says, Dear ICU Doctor, I have been an avid listener of your podcast since its inception, almost 3 years ago. I think I have been doing it for 3 years. Never missed an episode. I just wanted to reach out and tell you how much I sincerely enjoy it. When I started listening, I was applying to medical school, and now I am about to start my M3 year in a city that I will withhold. So that's awesome. M3 means he's a medical student, so that's amazing. It's been really cool watching my knowledge grow over the last 2 years to the point where I can understand almost everything you talk about on the episodes. Your show is engaging and informative, and I love every second of it. I also owe you a debt of gratitude for reigniting a love for reading in me. In late high school and college, I mostly thought reading was too boring for my extroverted personality. Turns out I wasn't reading what I was interested in. Yep. Your thoughtful and insightful reviews of nonfiction books particularly has helped me to see how much I enjoy that genre. Though I force myself to read more novels now since I'm in medical school. Yeah, when I was in med school, I didn't read a lot of novels. I mean, I did, but you got to. When you're studying, you got to have that release valve. Anyway, Michael says, so thank you for indirectly rekindling a love of books in me. It has helped me keep me sane among the endless lectures in pathology and histology, etc. I know what he's talking about. I did have a question that I was hoping you could answer. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the difference in practice styles / work environments between an ICU doc who did an anesthesia residency and one who did an internal medicine residency, then a Pulm Crit fellowship. Not sure if there's a big difference or if you have already answered this on the podcast, but I'd be interested in knowing what would motivate someone to choose one path over the other if they ultimately wanted to staff an ICU. Again, thank you for the work you put into the podcast and the book reviews. They bring a lot of joy to my life. Sincerely, Michael. Michael, thanks for the email and thanks for the kind words. I really do appreciate it. It does keeps me going, keeps me doing this. And I love your question. And it's a question I get a lot. So there's different routes to be doing critical care in America, right? You can do an anesthesia residency and then do a critical care fellowship. that's a typical path. The most typical path is doing an internal medicine residency and then a pulmonary critical fellowship. That's 3 years, and then become critical care. They're very different training, right? There's other paths, right? You could do emergency medicine, and then do a critical care fellowship. You could do a general surgery residency, and then a critical care fellowship. You can even do a nephrology residency and do a critical care fellowship. There's different paths to critical care. In the United States, I would say the most common critical care physician is a pulmonary critical care doctor who did internal medicine, followed by anesthesia critical care. In Europe, I believe in most European countries, it's anesthesiologists who are critical care physicians. Anyway, so there is a difference. So now any of these routes create phenomenal critical care doctors. It doesn't matter. There's not like, oh, this type is the best. That obviously is not the answer. You should decide what is interesting to you most, right? I loved anesthesiology, so I went into anesthesiology. And then I did critical care after that. But I would say here's a big difference to me between, specifically getting to this question, between pulmonary critical care and anesthesia critical care. The big difference is how we think about the story of someone's illness. And here's what I mean by that. Internal medicine, and I love internal medicine. Doctors, I'm not throwing shade on them at all. I feel like we're trained in medicine to come up with a story to explain what's going on, right? Why is this patient sick? What is the diagnosis? Now, you got to have you do want to understand the diagnosis. You want to understand what's going on with the patient, because that guides your treatment, right? But I feel like internal medicine trained minds, they're more cerebral and they're more investigative. They're like Sherlock Holmes. Okay, they're like thinking about, hey, let's get these labs, let's get rheumatology involved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that has to do with their patient population, because they take care of more internal medicine type patients, right? Rather than surgical, is what I'm getting at. And so they tend to be more investigative, and they want more of a story, more of a narrative. Anesthesia critical care don't really care about that, from my experience. We just want to fix the problem and move on. Like, oh, this patient's really sick. Let's do this, that, fixed it, done. Okay, great. They're better. They're out of the ICU. Like, I'd say this a lot. I don't care about the mystery anymore. I do not care. Like, I'm being a little glib. It's not that I don't care. It's just that I'm not going to spend mental energy to figure out what happened 6 months ago that led to these things. That's not important to me right now. I'm going to fix the critical situation, try to turn that around, and get to the next patient. I feel like anesthesia critical care, we're more blunt. We're more blunt with our actions, and we focus on that rather than the thinking. I think we act first more than the thinking. If I had to sum it up, I think we act faster. I don't know if we act faster, but we act first, think later. Whereas Palm Crit, they kind of think first and then act. If I had to generalize it, obviously there's exceptions all around, but I would say that's a big difference between the two. All right, I'm going to do one more book review, and this is fiction, and I'm sorry, but the book I'm going to talk about is The Handmaid's Tale. I'm sorry I'm doing this to you. This is not a cheerful episode. I apologize. I'm really sorry that I just talked about Trumpism, neo-fascism, and now I'm finishing the episode off with A Handmaid's Tale. It's cruel. It's cruel what I'm doing to you. So Handmaid's Tale is written. It's a famous book. Everybody's heard about it. It was written in 1995 by Margaret Atwood. It's a hard book to read, okay? And as someone who loves dystopian classics, for some reason I never got around to reading it till recently. I never did. Never read it. And I'll say this. I'm glad I read it, and I'm glad to never, ever read it again. The book, it's a pretty brilliant book in its storytelling and about its, the patriarchal insurgency that occurs in the book in the United States and to the main character. It's also a slog of a boring book. It's full of tedium. And that tedium of the main character was another example of her oppression. She goes from a Western-style liberated woman who's educated, married, and with a child, and in a few short years, she is summarily placed into a patriarchal political insurgency where her only value is as a vessel to birth babies. Right? That's kind of the setup of the story. And my point about the tedium is that, along with being the victim of an autocratic theocracy, her life has lost meaning, and she is bored during the majority of this book, and so is the reader. It's a boring book. It really is. It's boring. During the first third of the book, I was kind of skeptical of how swiftly the theocratic regime was able to gain control of an uncertain but sizable control of the U.S., and then institute its biblical tyranny all over the people it controls. That's what happens. Major shifts in society occur within like an 8 to 10 year period, and it didn't seem realistic at first. But then I thought about Iran in the 1970s. It happened there, and it has happened in many places. This book is not really dystopian fiction. It's speculative fiction about the U.S., but the story told here is very real for many women around the world, both past and present. What happens in this book could happen in the U.S. in a very short time. In fact, there is a large number of conservative, fascist U.S. politicians and citizens that would like the societal structure in this book to be real right this second. If it weren't for an opposition party, this book would come to pass. And that's why the book is important, right? And you'll get everything else you'd expect. The hypocrisy of men, the women who perpetuate the patriarchy, the brutality and the violence of totalitarianism, and everything else is in this book. There's this rationale there's these characters called the ants. They're like older women who support the patriarchy. They're in charge. And here's a couple quotes from them. And this could easily be said by a woman today who's been indoctrinated by conservative patriarchy. Here's the quote: "There is more than one kind of freedom. Freedom to and freedom from. In the days of anarchy, it was freedom to. Now you are being given freedom from. Don't underrate it." Right? That's a quote from a woman who supports this patriarchal structure. And then there's those that allow fascism. They allow totalitarianism, this groupthink and monoculture to thrive by doing nothing. Here's a quote from the book. "She was thinking about how to not think. The times were abnormal. She took pride in her appearance. She did not believe he was a monster," talking about her husband. "He was not a monster to her. Probably he had some endearing trait. He whistled off-key in the shower. He had a yen for truffles. He called his dog Leibchen and made it up for little pieces of raw steak. How easy it is to invent a humanity for anyone at all." That's a quote about a woman who's normalizing her evil husband. So it's simply brilliantly done, the book. Did I enjoy it? No, I did not. It's not an enjoyable book, but that's not the point. It's not supposed to be an enjoyable book. But this book certainly sits along with a pantheon of other dystopian greats like 1984 and Brave New World and Fahrenheit and Blade Runner. I just want to end with two more great quotes from this book. "People will do anything rather than admit that their lives have no meaning. No use, that is, no plot." And then I'll leave you with this last quote from the book. "We are two-legged wombs, that's all. Sacred vessels. Ambulatory chalices." Amazing. Anyway, that's Handmaid's Tale. I don't recommend you read it because it's depressing. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thanks for indulging me in this episode today that was purely political. I will get back to medicine next time. You can email me at icudrecmo@gmail.com, icudrecmo@gmail.com. Email me with anything. Please, if you do not want me to read your email on the podcast, please tell me in the email and I will not. Please rate and review this podcast so that it gains organic followers and traction, and share it with somebody. You can be like, if you like this episode, share it with somebody. Send it, find the link in your iPod, whatever, and send it to someone. Be like, hey, I liked this episode by this person I listened to. That's how the podcast grows. And then I'm an author. I write fiction, science fiction. My pen name is Wick Welker, W-I-C-K Welker, W-E-L-K-E-R. I have a book coming out in May. It's called Dark Prophet. It is the third in a series that I'm writing. The first book is called Dark Theory, which is about a robot who wakes up in a junkyard who has no memory. And also, the universe is dying. It is a long sci-fi epic adventure, which I recommend you pick up if you want to read my next book coming out in May 15th, which I'll have more news about that soon. And you can check out my other books that I've written. My book, Saint Elspeth, is probably the most pertinent to what's going on right now. And I think it's my best written book. So you can check those out if you would like. And that's all I got. Thanks. Try to stay sane out there, okay? Thanks. I'll see you next time.